you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are you numb yet? I'm very impressed that everybody is still here, or at least the vast majority are still here. I'm really excited to be here, to be back in Iowa. This is my 5,423rd trip to Iowa, just a little exaggeration. After tomorrow, I'll be at 78 counties. I saw Chuck Grassley over there, and he reminded me that I had 21 more to go. But we are working very, very hard here. And I know that you have been deluged now with candidate after candidate talking about policy, and I was really tempted to do that, to just go through and sort of hammer through some more policy. And I really want to share some other things with you tonight. Maybe take a little different tact as we wrap up the evening and talk a little bit more about well, why I'm here. I'm here because Karen and I, who have been married 21 years, we have 7 children. And we are very, very blessed to have those 7 children. We homeschool those children. And I'm here because I believe, as Newt said, and he says it all, I say it all the time, I think this is the most important election since the election of 1860. I think this is an election where we need a leader that we can trust. I said in my announcement speech that in 2008, the American public elected someone that they could believe in. And in this election, the American public will elect someone that believes in them. And that's the fundamental difference. You've heard a lot of policy up here from a lot of people as to whether the choice for you as to whether the folks that are delivering this are authentic. Can they be trusted? These are people who stood up when they had their opportunity and did what was called to be done? Did they stand up and fight the tough battles? I heard a lot of policy prescriptions tonight. But did they have those policy prescriptions? Did they fight those fights when they had the opportunity to fight those fights? Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to whether it's national security issues, I fought those fights. I introduced a bill on Iran, the Iran Freedom Support Act, because I knew at that time it was the existential threat to Israel and the real threat. I supported the war in Iraq, but even at the time I said, the bigger threat is Iran. That's what we need to be focusing on. I introduced a bill in 2004 called the Iran Freedom Support Act, and I had no co-sponsors. No one would sign on to that bill. Within 2 years, not only did everyone sign on, but it passed unanimously in the United States Senate because they understood what I did, what I saw, which is not something popular because it was a very unpopular war that was going on in Iraq, as we know today. But I stood up and I said, here is the problem. We need to do something to overturn the government of Iran. Newt is right. What's going on in Iraq right now is that we are losing the battle to Iran. They will be stronger when we leave. They are strong now. That's why we can't get a deal with them. That's why we can't protect our soldiers. Because Iran is that sphere of influence is growing. Look at the attack the other day. Well, I shouldn't say the attack, the thwarted attack. There wasn't a mistake that the Iranians focused here on America and the Saudis. The Saudis are the head of the Islamist world. They are the head of the Islamic world. And that's why they went after the Saudis, because they want to show, Iran wants to show that they are the ones who should be leading the Islamic world in an Islamist direction. And they went after them here in the United States because they wanted to show the rest of the world that they are not afraid of going after the great Satan, because they believe that the President of the United States is too weak to respond, won't have the courage to do what's necessary to stop them. If they obtain a nuclear weapon, Iran will now have a nuclear shield to be able to do what we saw thwarted the other day on a day-by-day basis and not worry about what's going on with someone potentially attacking them, because no nuclear power has ever been attacked. I was out there on the front line before any saw this. I was opposed by President Bush, by Secretary Rice, but I fought. I've been out there on the front line on the issue of the economy and reducing the burden on our economy with these huge entitlement programs. I was the author of the welfare reform bill, not just because it cut money, but because it transformed lives. You see, I'm someone who looks at the basic economy of our country, and as you heard in the debate the other night, it was a debate on Bloomberg. It was about the economy. Not one person, except me, mentioned the basic economy, and that's the family. If we don't have strong families in America, we will not have a strong economy in this country. But I've been out there fighting the fight on the economy, on cutting government back and strengthening the family. I wrote a book. It was in response to Hillary Clinton's book. She wrote a book called It Takes a Village. I wrote a book called It Takes a Family. And it's a policy prescription. It's a policy prescription, 400 and some odd pages, of how, if we're going to transform America. I understand what Ron is saying. I understand what all the folks up here are talking about, how we have to cut this and do that. If our battle in this election, and when hopefully we're successful, is whether we're going to cut taxes for higher income people or not, we are not going to unite this country. We have to unite them on something that is commonly shared, and that's a sense of the first economy, the family. We have to unite them on how we're going to bring people together to strengthen the American family, to strengthen marriage, to create jobs. If you look at my economic plan is focused, yeah, we cut taxes, we do things, but we focus on one very important thing, and that is growing the opportunity for the middle of America to expand. I do it by focusing on the manufacturing sector of the economy. We grow that sector of the economy. You allow people who are not college educated. College educated people are doing pretty well in our economy. The rest are struggling. We don't talk about that as conservatives. Why? Why don't we? Let's talk about the family. Let's talk about those who want to provide for their families and provide them a platform, provide a society with a platform where jobs can grow that can employ people who are skilled and semi-skilled to fill that middle of America back up. Our plan does that. Our plan does it, and it can get bipartisan support to do it. Why? I was in New Hampshire the other day, spoke to the legislature, bipartisan legislature, and went through I call it my 0-0-0 plan. Because 0 is better than 9. But it zeroes out the corporate tax for manufacturers. It zeroes out repatriated profits to invest in any tax on repatriated profits that come back into the country. It zeroes out every regulation that affects manufacturers that costs over $100 million. It will create jobs in this country. And one of my supporters in the New Hampshire legislature came up to me afterward and said, you know, 2 Democrats came to him and said they'd like me to go into their district and talk about this plan because they could support something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to bring people together on the basic values of our country, on the basic things that I have stood for and fought for. This is a rally on faith and freedom. You know, there was a book written recently where they interviewed a member of the Chinese government who had worked in trying to figure out, as China was opening, they were trying to figure out what was going to make what made the difference in America, what made them the greatest country in the history of the world. And you know what it turned out to be? They said, first, what we thought, this committee that was put together, first we thought it was their economy. We figured, no, it's not their economic system. Then we thought it was their guns, their military might. No, it wasn't that. Then they thought that it was their governmental system. No, it wasn't that. You know what they decided was what made America the greatest country in the history of the world? Faith. Faith. People's beliefs in a transcendent God. Ladies and gentlemen, I've dedicated my public career to all of the things I talked about. I talked about national security, I talked about the economy, I talked about cutting taxes, but the area that I've dedicated and fought on the battlefield, well, I'll just give you a quote from last night's Bill Maher show. Bill Maher said, Rick Santourm is like the Japanese soldier on a remote island after World War II, who didn't know that the war was over when it comes to the abortion issue and marriage and homosexual marriage. Ladies and gentlemen, are those issues lost in America? Are they lost? No. But we need to have a leader who understands in their heart and that will go out and fight for those. I've done that. I did that when I was in the United States House, the United States Senate. I didn't always do it. But when I came to the United States Senate, I had something happen to me. I know we heard some stories here of people of how they came to Christ. Well, I always say I went to the United States Senate and I found the Lord. And I did it in one of the most almost casual ways. Ended up going to a Bible study by an amazing preacher by the name of Lloyd John Ogilvie. We had a great pastor at our church, and that combination, Karen and I just became on fire with our faith. And as a result of that, I decided I had a purpose of being in the United States Senate. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then there's this bill that came up called partial birth abortion. And I looked at this and I said, you know, I'm a senator from Pennsylvania. It's a tough state. It's a state that I should probably just keep my head down, do what most folks up here do, just sort of check the boxes, but not really step out. And I decided, no more. That's why I'm here. And I went to the floor of the United States Senate and I fought the battle. I fought the battle on overturning President Clinton's veto on the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. I fought in 1996, and I fought again in 1998, and I fought again in 2000. And then the Supreme Court struck down a Nebraska statute. We kept losing because we couldn't override the president's veto. But I kept fighting. And then in 2001, President Bush was elected. So I went with a group of folks in the House of Representatives. I said, look, the Supreme Court struck down the Nebraska statute. We are an equal branch of government. We don't have to stand for this. Let's get together, pass a bill that says right in the front, the Supreme Court, you're wrong, and lays out the case as to why they're wrong. We passed that bill. It was signed by the president. It was eventually appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reversed their decision and found in favor of being constitutional. I hear a lot of theory up here. That's practice. You hear a lot of folks who say we're going to stand up to the court with tough judges. I did it. We took on the United States Supreme Court on the most controversial issue there is, the issue of abortion, and we beat them. We took them on because it's a passion in my life. Why is it a passion? I'll share a little story as I close. It's a story that happened right at the end of the first debate on partial birth abortion. There was a discussion the final day, and it was Dianne Feinstein got up and started talking about how, and this was the reason for partial birth abortion, children, we found out, mothers and fathers found out late in pregnancy that the baby they were expecting was not exactly what they were expecting. The baby was somehow not perfect, and therefore late in pregnancy they wanted to terminate that pregnancy. And so Feinstein got up and talked about how mothers find out that they have an abnormal baby that maybe doesn't have ears or eyes, or has organs that are outside of the baby. Basically saying that we need to cull the disabled in the womb. And I got up, and I'll quote you what I said. I said, think about the message we're sending to the less than perfect children in America, and the mothers who are right now dealing with the possibility of delivering an abnormal baby. My wife is due in March, and we haven't had a sonogram done. We're hopeful that everything's fine. But what message are you sending to me if I look at that sonogram in a week or two and things aren't just right? Well, a week later, Karen and I went in for that sonogram. And the doctor kept going over this one area. We were there with our 3 little children. And he looked at us and said, "Your son has a fatal defect and is going to die." We packed up the kids as quickly as we could. We went into the car and we cried and cried. And then I made a decision. We said, no, we're not going to just sit here and take it. We're going to do something about it. I'd just been up to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia the week before and had a meeting with a doctor who had done this breakthrough surgery of intrauterine surgery. So I called him. He said, "I don't know if we can help, but come on up." Well, after a few days, they figured out they could do something. Of course, they recommended an abortion. And of course, we told them, no. Why? Why would we kill our son? Why, if your child is in trouble, would you not do everything you can to help them? And the surgery was done. It was a miracle. It worked. We came home that night, packed up the next day because we had to head to a reunion, a family reunion over it's actually a 50th wedding anniversary of my wife's parents in Pittsburgh. The next day I'm driving on an appointment and I get a call from my sister-in-law. Come home. Karen's running a high fever. We were told that everything would probably go all right unless she ran a high fever. So I came back home, her fever was 103 and she was in labor. We knew what was going on. She had something called chorioamnionitis, which is the placenta was holding our son, was infected, and the body was trying to expel it. We went through hours of horror as we wanted to save our child, but yet couldn't save our child. He was delivered in the middle of the night. He was born alive, but far too small to survive. And we held him for 2 hours. It was 2 hours where he knew only love, not a bad life. The next day we took him home so our children could know that they had a little brother, that he was real, he was a person, he had dignity, and he was part of our family. My Karen and I struggled a lot. I remember talking to Pastor Ogilvie, and he said to me, "Pray for the gift of understanding." I didn't want to. I was angry. I had committed myself to the Lord. I was doing the brave and heroic thing of standing up for life, risking my political career in Pennsylvania. And this was my answer: you take my son. Karen did more. She wrote. She kept writing. She wrote letters. She always did with all of our children from the time that they were born, the time that we found out of their pregnancy. She would have these little sonogram pictures and little diaries and notes, just telling the kids what their life was like, because we knew at the moment of conception that was our son or our daughter. She kept writing those letters, and about a month later, her mom came to see her, and she read all the letters. And she said, "You should publish them. Maybe they will help heal somebody." Well, she published this little book called Letters to Gabriel. 25,000 copies from a publisher who had never published a book before and never published another book afterwards. And there isn't a month that goes by that I don't meet somebody who was touched, whose life was saved, whose baby was delivered, or whose burden was lessened. I always tell my children that if you can do for God and for life what your little brother did in 2 hours, you will be a great warrior for God. One final story. It's from the last page of Karen's book. The last page of Karen's book, Letters to Gabriel, it's a letter to our son. And it reads as follows. During the partial birth abortion debate, a senator, Senator Boxer, I might add, was thanking the women who had had partial birth abortions from coming forward with their stories. There were women in between the elevator of the Senate office buildings and the Senate chamber itself who had had this procedure, and they were buttonholing senators trying to get them to vote against this bill. She says, quote, "They're crying. They're crying because they don't understand how senators could take away an option. They're crying because they don't believe that those senators truly understand what this meant for their families." Karen continues, "Daddy said in response, the senator says she hears the cries of women outside this chamber. We would be deafened by the cries of the children who are not here to cry because of this procedure." The Washington Post described what happened next. Republican Senator Rick Santourm turned to face the opposition and a high pleading voice cried out, "Where do we draw the line? Some people have likened this procedure to an appendectomy. That's not an appendix," he shouted, pointing to a drawing of a fetus. "That's not a blob of tissue. It's a baby. It's a baby." The Post continued. And then, impossibly, in an already hushed gallery, in one of those moments when the floor of the Senate looks like a stage set, with its small wooden desks somehow too small for the matters at hand, the cry of a baby pierced the room, echoing across the hallway, echoing across the chamber from an outside hallway. No one mentioned the cry, but for a few seconds, no one spoke at all. A coincidence, Karen continues, perhaps. A visitor's baby was crying as the door of the Senate gallery opened at that precise moment and then closed. Or maybe it was the cry from the son whose voice we never heard, but who has changed our lives forever. You want to know why I'm pro-life? Do you want to know why I stand up and fight for the family and marriage? Because God showed me that if you are faithful, He will be faithful. Ladies and gentlemen, we need people who are leaders in this country who believe that, who believe that the faithfulness of God, that He has blessed this country and He has blessed each and every one of us. And if we stand and we are faithful and fear not, that this country again could have a rebirth of freedom like we have never seen before. Thank you and God bless.